No, no. And so anyway, you may go, oh, I'm never going to take another class from Debbie again because she has these stories about these guys that are not people we would want to emulate. But anyway, hopefully we can learn some things today. So let's start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your 66 books. Thank you for giving this to us, for us to read and to learn from and to know who you are. Thank you for our patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and open our hearts and minds to hear more about what your message says, how that applied in this time it was written, and how it applies in our lives today. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, so Jacob. Last time we wrapped up, we started with Abraham. Huge story of Abraham. Then we kind of squeezed Isaac in there. Not a real big story about Isaac. Isaac's got that little romance story in there with his wife. Then they have a little bit of a challenge where we ended up where she talked to the Lord because she was having twins, and which was a wonderful story that she reached out to him. And God told her that the second was going to be the one that the blessing was through. We don't know if she ever told Isaac this, but that's kind of where we left this story out. So we're going to start with Genesis. We're still in Genesis, chapter 27, if you have your Bibles. And yes, this is another ginormous story. And if we thought Abraham was fast, we're really going to go fast through Jacob. So we ended Jacob. He has stolen the birthright in that Abraham has blessed him. Esau has found out. Esau is not happy about that, as you can imagine, and he is fleeing for his life. So in chapter 27, we are going to start with verse 46. We ended with verse 41. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. So now Rebecca goes there. Obviously there's not good things happening. Rebecca goes to Isaac and says, Isaac, I am not happy here. We need to find a wife for Jacob. So continuing in verse 46. Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the Hittite women. So Esau has married these Hittite women, and it is making her life miserable. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women, such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, you shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply, that you may become a company of peoples. I'm in chapter 28 now. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, that you may take the possessions of the land of your sojourners, which God gave to Abraham. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away. So this is where we're going to pick up the story. Jacob is now, I don't know, 20s or something of that nature, and he is going to flee. And he's going to flee with not much more than his backpack. The story of Jacob is a tragedy. So we were kind of reflecting back on the Shakespeare kind of analogy. This is going to be a tragedy, and there are going to be tragedies inside this tragedy. Make sure you come next week because we're going to have Christmas, so that'll be a good one. But and in this, I think the Bible wants us to recognize that this is a tragedy, right? And from all good tragedies, you should be learning some lessons. And so we are going to look at those lessons, and watch Jacob's growth, and watch and kind of reflect maybe on our own lives and see ourselves in this tragedy. So Jacob flees, and on the way to his brother, his uncle would be Laban, would be his uncle. To his uncle's house, he has a dream. And you're probably familiar with this dream. If you haven't read it recently, you're probably familiar with it with I am climbing Jacob's ladder, right? And so it's a ladder, a ramp, a staircase, something of that nature in his dream, depending on how you interpret that Hebrew word. And so angels are coming up and down this ladder, and then at one point, God appears to him. And so we're going to pick this story up in chapter 28. I'm going to pick it up with verse 13. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. So before we read the blessing coming from his father to him, now we are seeing God is going to actually extend this blessing to him. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your descendants, and your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And by you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth bless themselves. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done that which I have spoken to you. Wow. Now, next week when we reflect on Mary, what's Mary going to respond to this, right? She's going to say, here I am, Lord, and respond. Let's see what Jacob says. So we're going to go to verse 18. So Jacob arose early in the morning and took the stone which he had put under his head and set it for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. So he's honoring this, he's anointing this, and called the name of that place Bethel. Make note to yourself that name, but the name of the city was Luz at first. Our narrator kind of comes in and gives us a little hint. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God, an if-then statement when somebody gives you a promise is not a good thing. If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I can come again to my father's house, then the Lord shall be my God. That's not usually what we want to hear. We want to hear more of a magnificent from Mary's perspective. But sometimes, we think about that. Do we do that? God, if you just do this, I promise I'll do that. So hopefully if God is speaking to us directly, we wouldn't be saying that. But maybe we can see a little bit of ourselves in that too.
Well, this is a little early in the documented interaction between
Correct.
God and mankind. It goes all the way back to Noah and the like, but there wasn't a lot of experience necessarily for Jacob to draw on.
Right, except for that hopefully you would have.
Time there'd been 1,000 years.
Right, except for that he would have known that Jacob, he had spoken to Rebecca, his mother. Yeah. He had spoken to his father. He had spoken to his grandfather. So it wasn't like he was unfamiliar with this promise.
He had the example.
Yes, he had the example.
Father and grandfather.
Yeah, yeah.
And some of that example wasn't all that good.
Yeah, correct. Right, that's right. Abraham.
So they're still maturing.
They're still maturing. It's going to take Jacob a long time to mature.
Just as a race of Jews interacting with God, they're still maturing in how to interact with this, this presence.
Yes. Yeah, and these stories are being told to people that have just come out of 400 years of slavery, right, in Egypt. And so they are telling, this is a story about who God is. And we're going to see through this story Jacob's tragic responses, which hopefully we can kind of look at and reflect on, but we're going to see God's faithfulness through the whole thing. And not only to Jacob, but to other communities also, right? When we look at the Bible, sometimes we think this is all God did, right? He's blessing other nations. He's going to bless Esau, right? He told Isaac, I'm going to bless your children, not one child. I'm going to bless your descendants. And so we're going to see how that happens too. I put a little reference here into Jesus and Nathaniel, and I'm not going to expound on that today because it's already going to take me the whole time to do that. But I have a great book, 12 Ordinary Men, talks about the disciples. And sometimes, at least for me, it was hard to understand who the disciples were because you just get a little bit in each one. And this kind of pulls them all together. And there's a reference in there where Jesus is going to talk to Nathanael and says, does anybody not a cheater come out of Israel? And he's kind of reflecting back on these Jacob stories. And so and that's the other thing, is as we kind of hear these stories and learn about these stories, there's a lot of reflection in these stories back to the Eden and Noah creation. We're going to leave Bethel, was kind of the promised land. We're going to come back to Bethel, kind of an Eden story there, kind of a Noah story there. So you could go way in depth that direction. Or you can also look forward. I mean, Isaiah is going to have a lot of quotes. Jesus is going to have a lot of, there's lots of references back to these patriarchal stories. So I was going to spend some time on that. Really going to not. Okay, so then he's had this dream. He's had this if-then response, and he has moving on. And so he gets closer to where Laban lives, and he runs into, it's kind of a funny story here, but he runs into a bunch of shepherds just hanging around this well. And these wells are covered by like a big stone, and you roll the stone away and everybody feeds their sheep. And he comes to these gentlemen and he asks them if they know Laban, and they say yes. And then he sees Rachel, okay, Laban's daughter. And here comes Rachel, Laban's daughter. Rachel is a Hebrew word for sheep, actually. And so she comes, and he moves that stone away. Well, the guys are not happy about that, because apparently the custom at that time is you waited until everybody got there. Then you move the stone away, and everybody drinks from the well together. And Jacob instead decides, I'm going to show who Rebecca, how wonderful I am, and I'm going to roll the stone away for her. So it's a kind of funny story there, if you're not, which I wasn't, up on Hebrew culture or what was happening, but that's kind of what's happening there. So he's kind of making those guys go, he's not bringing in the brotherhood here. So he has fallen in love with Rachel, and he goes to Laban, his uncle, and he says, I would like to marry Rachel. And he says, okay, great. I will give her, you need to work for me for 7 years. So he works for Laban for 7 years. And then they have the wedding, and then they have the marriage bed. And when everything was revealed, he has been married to the older daughter. So as you may remember, when we talked about Rebecca leaving, there was Laban was kind of a little bit of a cheater, kind of a trickster, trying to getting to Rebecca to stay instead of going with Isaac. And so here he's back up to his own tricks again. And so he has tricked Jacob into marrying the older daughter. He says, well, tradition is you marry the oldest daughter first. Well, maybe they could have had that conversation before. Maybe they could have, put it on Facebook or whatever the thing is to, see if you could find. But anyway, he is tricked. And he says, okay, you need to spend a week with Leah, which means cow. And you spend a week with Leah, and then you can marry Rachel. So he's a week with Leah, and then he marries Rachel. And then he needs to work another 7 years for Rachel.
Who did the bait and switch, Laban?
Yes. And so now you have this wonderful opportunities of two sisters married to the same man. So these are terrible stories about abuse of women. Obviously, they're going to have huge sisters rivalry in the next texts, and it kind of goes on from there. So, yeah, I don't know. Oh, yeah, there probably is an Exodus or something like that about not marrying sisters, but there should be, right? I mean, I love my sisters dearly, but it's just not a good story. And people, when they got this story at the time, knew, ooh, this is not good. This is not good, right? So Leah does have 4 sons, and those sons are, let's see if I underline them here. She does have 4 sons, and she has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. But Rachel has no children. So we get to chapter 30, and we're going to start with chapter 30, verse 1. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. which would be natural. And she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." We just really don't want to read these next couple of sentences, but Jacob's anger was kindled with Rachel. So I just want to point out, we have had scenes where Jacob has seen Rachel and loved her. Here he's having a conversation with her. He's angry at her. So you're generally only angry at people that you have a relationship with. So we do see that Jacob and Rachel have a relationship. We never see anything about Jacob and Leah having a relationship. He said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her that she may bear the children." Remember, that didn't work really well for Grandma and Grandpa. So he does. And I want you to remember the name Bilhah, because we're going to run into her again a couple more times. So he gives the maid Bilhah, and Bilhah has 2 children, Dan and Naphtali. Well, then the sister, Leah, sees this, and she's not going to be outdone. So in verse 9, when Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Jacob now has 3 wives and a concubine, Bilhah. And, and Zilpah has 2 children, Gad and Asher. So then it goes on, verse 14, about this weird story about these mandrakes and Reuben. So by this time there are 6 boys, so Reuben could be anywhere from 6 to 18, right? It doesn't tell us, but you have to assume he's a young teenager or something of that nature. He has these mandrakes, and I was going to Google mandrakes to see what that was, but at the time, mandrakes were supposed to have a mystical power for fertility. And so then these 2 sisters are fighting for these mandrakes. And so we kind of have this yucky story of these 2 sisters bidding for these mandrakes from the oldest son, Reuben. So then Leah does conceive. She doesn't end up with the mandrakes, but she does conceive, and she has 2 more sons and a daughter. So she has a son, Issachar, and Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her named Dinah. Then in verse 22, then God remembered Rachel and hearkened to her and opened her womb. So if you're hearkening to somebody, that must mean somebody is calling out to you, right? So we have some examples of maybe Rachel reaching out to the Lord. So she conceives and she has Joseph. So Joseph is kind of born into a little bit of a messed up family, which I think, we can all sort of relate to families being complicated. So some of these are brothers and half brothers and real brothers and brothers and a half. I'm not sure how that all works, but he is number 11 into this rather complicated family. Then at this point, it's been almost 20 years, and Jacob says, it's time for me to go back. I'm done with you, Laban. I've got a mess here. You're complicating it. I want to leave. And then he and Laban have this conversation, this trickster tricking the other trickster on the property. So we're going to look at sheep and goats. And Jacob says, fine, I'll take the spotted and the striped goats. And Laban says, okay, I'll take the pure ones. Well, then Laban sneaks off some of his pure ones to his sons. Jacob does this weird, another cult sort of thing, a fertility thing, where he takes some branches and makes them striped. And if you do that, where the goats and sheep are mating, then they're supposed to have striped and spotted goats and sheep. So they're tricking each other in this rather complicated story. So you're watching this as a Shakespeare play, and you're seeing the tragedy of this all, right? So Jacob, once again, in chapter 31, he's like, I want to leave. I want to go back to my homeland. Yes.
We'll go to chapter 31, just one clarification. I'm not sure, the mandrake story, is that Leah's second set of kids? Was that through
Yeah.
Jacob or through somebody else?
Through Jacob.
Was through
Yes,
Jacob.
it was through Jacob. Yeah.
What's the I don't understand what the mandrake.
Yeah, it's some sort of fertility fruit. I guess if you ate them, then you were more fertile. Pardon me? Made her more fertile. Yes, correct. Yes, made her more fertile. Yep. Yes, the man never suffers from that issue. It's always the woman's fault. And the children are not. More details than you wanted to know? Okay. So in chapter 31, once again, Jacob says, I am done, right? And in verse 3, we see, then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. And Jacob says, let's go. Let's go now. He goes and tells his wives about this. It's very nice. He's having a conversation with both of them. Kind of elaborates on this story a little bit, exactly what God told him, but he convinces them it's time to go. And so he starts heading out. Well, Laban's sons are not happy with how much spotted and striped goats he's taking with them. He's a source of labor for them, all those sort of things. And so there's Laban and his team are not super excited about this. So watching the picture, we are watching Jacob and his wives and his children and his concubine leaving, fleeing, right, for trying to get out before Laban knows that they're gone. And then we see a big chase scene. And Laban is coming into the scene. What's he going to do? Right? What's going to do with Jacob? He does track him down. They have a conversation, and Laban does decide to let him leave. He does say, though, that you know what? Some things have been stolen from the household that were not yours, including some golden idols. And so Jacob says, we don't have those. I had a conversation with my wives. We don't have those. But Rachel has actually stolen these and has put them under her saddle and on her camel or whatever she's riding. So she has hidden these idols. So now he's free of Laban. He's going back to the promised land, to Canaan, and all of a sudden it dawns on him, oh my gosh, I'm going to be coming to my brother Esau. The blessing was with me, right? So what kind of state am I going to find him in? He wants to kill me. It's been 20 years, but he probably still wants to kill me. And what in the world is going to happen? And so he starts dividing his family. He's going to put the servants and things here. He's going to put Rachel and her family here. He's going to put Leah and her family there. Who knows where he's going to be, but probably in the back. He's trying to keep himself safe, all those sort of things. And he has this big aha moment of desperation. And guess what he does? Calls out to the Lord. So, yay, Jacob, go Jacob. So we're going to read that in chapter 32, verse 9. When all else fails, when you're really scared or you're afraid for your life. Yeah, that's right. Turn to God. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac. That's a wonderful way to start a prayer, right? Recognizing who God is. O Lord, who did say to me, return to your country and return to your kindred, and I will do you good. He's recalling those words of the Lord. I am not worthy of the feast of all the steadfast love and all the faithful witness which thou hast shown to thy servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. This is just a nice way to set up a prayer. Honoring God, recognizing who God is, honoring God, thanking God for your incredible blessings. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him. Opening up your heart, telling God exactly where you are, lest he come and slay with us, the mothers with the children. But thou didst say, I will do you good, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So a wonderful prayer. Jacob is learning, right? And it's a great prayer where kind of does things in the right order, shows that he's afraid, and kind of puts it in God's hand. Says, you know, if I get up there and I get slain, kind of so be it, right? I know that you are in control. So, but he does he does send some sheep and some gifts ahead with his servants so that Esau to kind of appease Esau, and then he has this funny dream, another dream, where he's wrestling with God. So this is a very interesting dream also, unless, how many of you have ever wrestled with God? Okay, maybe not physically, but maybe I can put myself in this story. Where have I ever struggled? And so this is this story. And then there, you know, it's a riddle, and it's supposed to make you think, you know, was this God or were these angels? But it's kind of also going to make you reflect maybe back on the Abraham story when the three came to him to tell him about Sarai conceiving, about then going to Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, who were those people? And it's kind of making you think through that, right? Just like a Shakespeare play, you're like, what are those characters? Where do they come from? What do they mean? And so this is kind of getting you to think about this. And they do wrestle, and God says, I'm going to change your name from Jacob, which means trickster, to Israel, which means father of many, or something like that. So so then he feels like he has seen the face of God, and he is a changed person, or a changing person, maybe is a better way to say it. This is a very famous story. He is hurt he's hurt in the inner thigh during this struggle. And there's many references in the Bible about this, including a very famous one in Isaiah 49 through 55 kind of reflects on this story. It says, by our wounds are we healed. So in this struggling with God, Jacob has been wounded, but he's also been healed. So he wakes up from the dream and he goes to meet Esau. And we have another big aha moment about Jacob. So turning to chapter 33, verse 3. So where is Jacob in this? He's divided everybody to see who gets slain first or who gets, and what does he do? In verse 3, he himself went on before them. So he is now trusting in the Lord, saying, here I am, brother. The Lord has promised me these things, and I'm going to trust him, and he has put himself in front. So he goes and he greets Esau, and what happens with Esau? Anybody read the story? Esau takes out his sword and challenges him to something. Esau embraces him. He is so excited to see him. It's this wonderful story of these two brothers reuniting. And and this may be something that, I mean, obviously Jesus would have known these stories inside and out, right? And you know, and kind of maybe some reflection on the prodigal son, where a father or a son or a brother has been greatly wronged, but you're so excited to have that person that wronged you come back into the fold, come back into the family. And so it's just a wonderful story of these two brothers reuniting. And then you read about Esau, and Esau's not been sitting there twiddling his thumbs. He hasn't, you know, been living a life of poverty. God has blessed him also, and he says, God has been good to me. Look, I have all these. I'm a wealthy man, and he talks about all the things. I don't need your gifts because I have so much already. So he says, come with me, come back to where Isaac is, come see our father, come back to the homeland. And Jacob's like, you know, maybe not yet. And so Esau goes back, and Jacob goes to a different part of Canaan. So the brothers do separate. So kind of a feel-good story, like things are finally turning the corner, people are leaning into the Lord, all those sort of things. And then we have chapter 34. And this is when I got to like, oh, Debbie, I'm going to really reread my stories before I volunteer to teach something. So, so I'd love to skip through this, but we're not going to. We're going to talk about this because this is a tragedy in sort of inside this tragedy. And it is a tragedy about Dinah, right? So the daughter of Jacob through his wife Leah. And it's the only daughter, so maybe he only had sons. We don't know, but it's a story about her oppression. So here, once again, we have talked about sister rivalry, treating women bad, selling them as property. And here we're going to have a story about Dinah being raped. Where is Jacob in the story? Nada. Jacob doesn't step in, doesn't try to right a wrong, doesn't try to do anything. The brothers decide to take revenge, kind of a reflection sort of on that Cain and Abel stories and maybe some Noah stories. It's a terrible story, and as we learn later in the Bible, that it tells us that revenge is the Lord's, right? So what happens here is that the brothers confront them, and the king, the prince who raped Dinah, has gone to his father and said, actually, I'd like to marry this woman. And the father says, okay, these seem like really good people. Jacob and his clan seem like good people. Let's partner with them. And so they approach them and say, we would like to marry Dinah. Let your daughters marry our sons, and your sons marry our daughters. You seem like a good group of people. Kind of like Abimelech, they kind of stood up and did the right thing. And the brothers say, okay, especially Simeon and Levi, kind of leading this charge. They say, okay, but you're not like us. You're not circumcised. So all the men need to be circumcised. So the guys are like, okay, you know what? And they tell their townspeople, and they all say, sure, that works for me. And so they're all circumcised. On day 3, when they're very sore from the circumcision, the brothers attack the village and kill all of them. So there is no mention of God in this story. It's very evident. It's like we've kind of freeze-framed from Esau and Jacob parting ways, and we've gone to another scene where this horrific thing happens outside of this circle, outside of this bubble. God is gone. God is not there. And we are meant to read this story and lament, and the people would have heard this and been very sad that anybody could treat anybody like that they could have treated somebody like this. God needs to be in our stories, and when we don't put him in our stories, mankind can do horrible, horrible things. Are we as Hebrew people, as they are, we as Christians, how do we treat the oppressed, right? How do we treat the widows, the immigrants, the orphans? Are we silent like Jacob was, or do we take action? So this is a terrible story about things gone really wrong, and then you realize why we have to have very simple lines in the Bible like "Revenge is the Lord's," right? Or in Exodus 20:21, an eye for an eye. I mean, maybe they could have taken one of the prince's sisters and married her off. I mean, as a worst case scenario, an eye for an eye is at least so equal. These people, when we look at ourselves, then sometimes you're not happy because your neighbor parked in front of your house. Well, you know what? I'm going to park all 3 of my cars in front of their house next week. You know what? We kind of need to look at ourselves sometimes. I mean, this is major, but this is something that's really supposed to make you pause and go, ooh, what well, I need to remember revenge is not the answer. So a very sad story that's make you are all going to go, oh, that wasn't good. We need to call on the Lord. Jacob should have stepped up. So then we moved on to 35. And we have Jacob going back into Bethel, So the same place that he had the dream with the ladder, staircase, ramp. And he is going to have a conversation with God in verse 9, so chapter 35, verse 9. God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. So this is the second time when he was wrestling with God. He gave the name change, and here again he's reminding him. So his name was called Israel. And God said to him, actually, I'm going to pause here for a second. So Israel, okay, complicated word, name. And so whenever you read it in the Bible, you need to stop and think, what are we talking about here? In the world since 1940, we think of Israel as a geographic location, especially here in the Western world. We think of it as a geographic location, a country. It was really never known as the country of Israel. For a short period of time, all 12 tribes were united under David and under Solomon. But for the most part, there was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. So, and when Jesus' time, there was Judah and Galilee. So whenever you see that, you need to stop and think, okay, we're not talking about a geography here. If they're going to talk about geography, they're going to call it Canaan, right? Second of all, are they talking about Israel, Jacob? Or are they talking about Israel, the Hebrew people, right? Are going to be called Israelites. So you kind of have to stop and think, okay, are they talking about the descendants of Israel? Are they talking about Jacob himself? Are they talking about a geographic, depends on your Bible, how they use that word. So always pause when you get to that word and think, okay, they mean as a whole, the tribe, the Hebrew people, right? Or, they're specifically referring back to Jacob's story in this story or something like that. So, okay, continuing on. And so his name was Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come to you, and kings shall spring from you. Now, this is the first time kings have ever been mentioned. So, the land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. So he comes back into Bethel. He builds an altar, and it seems like things are going pretty well. He now has received a blessing from God himself. Even kings are going to be coming from him, and things are looking like they might be pretty good. Unfortunately, in the rest of the chapter, it's a sad story of loss. His beloved wife, Rachel, becomes pregnant again with her second child, Benjamin, and she dies in childbirth. So a sad story there. The whole family does come together and honor God before Rachel passes away. They do. So this is a good, it's not only just Abraham or Isaac, this is really all of his people come together to a tree. They bury the idols. They really kind of commit themselves to the Lord at this point in time. So a good story there, but then unfortunately Rachel does die in Ephrath, and the Bible says, AKA Bethlehem. So remember that next week when we talk about Christmas, and where we know where Jesus is going to be born. So that's a little bit of a sad story. And then we have another sad story about Reuben and Bilhah. Remember who Bilhah was? The concubine, right? That Rachel gave to Jacob so that she could have some children. And so Reuben rapes Bilhah. Not a good story. It's very short, like 2 lines, I think, maybe even only 1. And this is kind of showing us why Reuben is definitely not, the line is not going to come through Reuben. Who does the line come from? Who's Jesus' line come from? David, and through Judah. Yeah, so the 12 is going to come through Judah. So not, once again, not a good story. And then we have Isaac. I think someone asked, and maybe Marlene asked last week or a couple weeks ago, when did Isaac die? So he does come back. There's no mention of Rebecca, so we have to assume that she has passed away. Jacob does not ever see his beloved mother. She has passed away when he comes home, but his father is still alive, and he does have a reunion with his father, and then his father passes away. And then Jacob and Esau bury Isaac. So that's another nice, kind of a nice thing. So then we have this really boring chapter, 36, of the descendants of Esau. And if you like reading old names that you can't pronounce for most part, it's an interesting chapter. But as I may have mentioned, I did 16 hours of Jacob on the Bible Project. And it was a big aha for me on chapter 36 and what's going on. And we tend to read the Bible and think it's all in chronological order. It was all nicely written, like a Harry Potter, like a J.K. Rowling's book, right? And it's not. These are fragments that are pulled together. Sometimes they're not in the right order. Sometimes stories are stuck in a little bit later. And so this story was obviously stuck in much later because it talks about descendants of Esau that are going to actually be about the same time of David. So, and what this story is telling us is that that God blesses other people, right? It's not just those few people that we are going to study in these 66 books, but he has blessed the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and all of the descendants of Jacob, right? And even those of us who have Gentile upbringings that have no reference. And so those are things that, Paul is going to lean into, that Jesus is going to lean into. This is not just for these thin little line of people that comes down to Jesus. The Bible is the story of that thin little line, but God is busy. He's working on other people's lives too. So great things happen to Esau and his descendants. We move on then. It kind of seems like that's the end. In fact, if we get to chapter 37, verses 1 and 2, it says, Jacob dwelt in the land of his father's sojourning, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of the family of Jacob. And we could just leave it right there because that's kind of his story. But I think that there's more to the story, right? We're looking at Jacob's life, and we've compiled it all into 10 pages that was 50 years or something like that, right? And so when you do that, you just see the bad, the dramatic, right? And so I think we also need to take a peek what happens until he dies, what happens in the rest of the story. So in the Joseph story, you can kind of understand why he might be the favorite. One, he is, the oldest of his beloved wife, Rachel. Second of all, he didn't rape and kill people. He didn't sleep with, your wife, because Bilhah was not a wife; she was a concubine. So you can see why Joseph might have looked like a shining beacon amidst some of these other brothers. And then Jacob is alive, right? Jacob has these 12 sons. You know the Joseph story. Joseph then, calls his dad to come, tells his brother to bring his dad. Joseph is the second in charge underneath the Pharaoh. And so then Jacob and all of his people move to Egypt, right? In the Joseph story. In fact, we'll read a couple of lines from some of those verses. So in 46, most of the other verses were about Joseph. And then you can maybe reread the Joseph story now that you kind of know some of the brothers a little bit better, and read that and go, oh, yeah. So Joseph went and told the Pharaoh, in verse 1. Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers and their flocks and herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. So, and from among his brothers, he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. So they have come in as a place of honor into Egypt. They've moved into Egypt. And then Jacob is living there in Egypt while Joseph is second in command. He does get old, and we moved on to chapter 48. And so Joseph has 2 sons. Ephraim and Manasseh. I'm not sure that's how you say that. And he wants his father to bless them. A little bit of trickster still here in Jacob, maybe. Or maybe he's really saying, it doesn't really matter who's first and who's second, right? And so he goes to bless his grandchildren. And actually, this is what he says in verse 5. So I'm in chapter 48, verse 5. So we've had conversations about, where's my dead son? We've had conversations about him sending his other sons to Egypt. And now he's come and reunited with Joseph in Egypt. And now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. So he's claiming these children as his own. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. So they are going to be treated equally as children. And then what he does, he gives the blessing, which is not a huge blessing. He's not blessing with, but he switches his hands. So the hand that is supposed to give the blessing to the oldest child goes to the youngest child, and he switches his hand. And Joseph's not happy about that, but kind of a little interesting story. Then on 49, I don't know how much time we've got here left. In chapter 49, Jacob is realizing, and it's so interesting, sometimes he calls him, sometimes we got Jacob, sometimes we got Israel. Then Jacob called his sons and said, gather yourselves that I may tell you what you shall befall you in the days to come. And so then here he speaks to each one of his children. Reuben, even though he was the firstborn, he is not going to, then you defiled it and you went up to my couch, right? So that means you slept with somebody in my bed that you shouldn't have, that should have been in my bed. Simeon and Levi, do not get it. Their weapons of violence are their swords because of what they did to Dinah. Judah, so I'm on verse 8. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Ooh, that kind of sounds like the Joseph story. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. But maybe now the brothers understand. It's okay, right? Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, he who dares rouse him up. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. David is going to come from Judah's line. Jesus is going to come from Judah's line. Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs. And of course, that's going to be Jesus. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So then he goes on with his other children and blesses them. In chapter 50, so Jacob actually goes all the way to chapter 50. In chapter 50, we have this wonderful burial scene. So Joseph goes to the Pharaoh and says, my father has passed away. I need to take him back to Canaan to bury him with his wife, with his parents, with his grandparents. And the Pharaoh says, go, make a party of it. And there's this wonderful group that goes to bury Jacob. So you sort of implies, as you're watching this, that Jacob must have been doing the right things in the end, right? He's obviously respected by his peers, even by the Pharaoh himself. So the beginning of the story is very, very tragic. The part of Jacob's life that the narrator wants us to hear is the tragic part, right? It's not really telling about all the good things that happen in Egypt. This is obviously before they fall into slavery, but he does end up as a respected member and patriarch of the Hebrew family. So that is the story of Jacob, and he passes away. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Whoa, Debbie, where'd you get that?
Didn't we spend like weeks or 8 weeks with Pastor Gary talking about Jacob and Joseph?
Yes.
He condensed it to
45 minutes.
Yeah. It's the same story.
Well, I didn't really talk to you about Joseph, right? But yeah, the same storyline. These are, yes, so it goes Abraham. So we have the story of Noah, and then we have the story of, and the lineage there, and we have the story of Babel. And then out of that story comes the story of Abraham, because he's down there in Ur. in the Tower of Babel area and in Mesopotamia. And God says, go up to Canaan. So then we have the story of Abraham going, changing his name from Abram to Sarah, to Abraham, binding Isaac, right, his son that is supposed to come through. Then I used to have continue on with the story of Isaac, his marriage, his raising of his two sons, and then we have the story of Jacob, his the son that is promised the blessing, and now all the way, and then one of his,
One that was sold into slavery.
and then Joseph, his son, was sold into slavery. Yep. Long history. We just basically did all of Genesis, right? You didn't do the creation stories, and didn't do Babel, and didn't do Noah.
All this is in Genesis.
All this is in Genesis. So you might want to reread Genesis with a new eye and go, oh, that's what. Or I would highly recommend the Bible Project. It's 16 hours. They did 40 minutes just on the Dinah story, which I condensed into 3.5. So if you really want to understand these stories and how they reflect forward and backward, the Bible Project is a really good. It's an app. An app. He's a Hebrew scholar from Portland here. Okay, next week is going to be Christmas, and it's going to be lots of fun. So come prepared. No, a little bit of tragedy. No, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you. I did it. Woo. Sometimes I timed and it was like 58 minutes, 58 minutes. And I'm like, ooh, I don't have 58.